long before the world was as dark as it is now, before the scourge marched upon the living, and before Arthas Menethil's name became a curse whispered by the wind, there was a knight, proud, steadfast, and full of light. His name was Tirion Fordring, and even as a boy, people said he shone with something rare, a sort of inner luminescence, like sunlight caught in a crystal goblet. The kind of person who'd apologize to a horse for stepping on its hoof and then probably bake it a pie to make amends. He was born in the kingdom of Lordaeron, in the Arathi Highlands, though stories vary. Some say nearer to the forests of Tirisfal. Others claim his family hailed from Stratholme's noble bloodlines. What we know for certain is that Tirion was raised in a house of duty, chivalry, and an almost comically strict sense of honor. You know the type. His father probably polished his armor before breakfast and lectured on the sanctity of shoe buckles. From his youth, Tirion trained with the Knights of the Silver Hand, an order founded by the revered Archbishop Alonsus Feol. And if you're thinking, oh, that sounds holy, well, yes, it was. So holy that you could probably smell incense 3 villages away every time a knight said their morning prayers. The Silver Hand was a new idea back then. Not just knights who swung swords, but knights who wielded the light itself. The light, that mysterious, radiant force of goodness and faith that can heal wounds, blind enemies, and occasionally cause awkward glows in your gauntlets when you try to eat soup. Tirion took to it with a natural grace. His instructors said he had the heart of a lion and the patience of a priest, which, if you've ever met a priest trying to herd paladins into battle formation, you'll know is the highest of compliments. He rose quickly through the ranks. By the time the Second War rolled across Azeroth, that brutal clash where the Orcish horde stormed through the dark portal, Tirion had already proven himself a leader of men. His voice carried conviction, his sword, righteousness, and his hair, one assumes, was perfectly groomed, because even at war, Tirion Fordring would never skimp on presentation. After the war's end, when the Orcish forces were beaten back and peace was fragile but possible, Tirion was granted stewardship over a region known as Hearthglen. Ah, Hearthglen, imagine it, a quiet valley tucked in the northern reaches of Lordaeron, fields of golden wheat swaying under an endless blue sky, the distant call of griffins, and the faint jingle of a farmer's bell. The name itself evokes warmth. It was the sort of place where milk stayed cold, bread stayed warm, and everyone knew everyone else, whether they wanted to or not. Tirion ruled fairly and kindly, as was his way. He was beloved by his people, admired by his peers, and even the local squirrels probably respected his moral code. Under his stewardship, Hearthglen became a place of safety and abundance, where justice wasn't just a word carved into a chapel wall, but something that lived and breathed in every villager's day. But, as with all things in Azeroth, peace has the lifespan of a murloc in a shark tank. One day, while riding along the borders of his land, a scenic little patrol, perhaps, to clear his mind and avoid paperwork, Tirion came across something unexpected. It was a ruin. Not just any ruin. An Orcish tower, long abandoned since the wars. He felt an old familiar tension in his chest, that cold memory of battle, and perhaps a flicker of curiosity. The orcs had been rounded up, hadn't they? Captured? confined in internment camps under the watchful eyes of the Alliance. And yet, there was movement, a shape in the shadows. Tirion dismounted and approached the ruin, his gauntlets gleaming in the afternoon sun. Inside, amid the rubble and broken stone, he saw something that would change the course of his entire life. An orc, old, battered, weathered like ancient oak, living in quiet exile. The creature's name was Eitrig. Tirion drew his sword at first, as any knight would. Orcs were the enemy. The horde had burned, slaughtered, defiled the lands of men. He demanded the orc explain himself, what he was doing here in Alliance territory. But Eitrig didn't rise to fight. He didn't snarl or boast. He simply stood there, calm, proud, and spoke words that were unexpected, words of honor. He spoke of his people's old ways, before the blood corruption, before the burning legion had twisted their souls. He spoke of a time when orcs valued courage, integrity, and respect for the spirits. He told Tirion that not all orcs were monsters, that some still held to a code not unlike the paladin's own. And here's where things got complicated. Because Tirion Fordring, Paragon of the Light, found himself listening. You could almost see it, this shining paladin, all armor and righteousness, standing there awkwardly while an orc recounts philosophy in a dusty ruin. The two might as well have been the setup for a bad tavern joke. A human paladin and an orc warrior walk into a ruin. But instead of a punchline, what came next was something beautiful. A friendship. For days after Tirion would return, he brought bread, news, and perhaps a cautious smile. He and Eitrig talked of war, of peace, of the strange way the world keeps spinning despite everything men and orcs have done to it. Tirion came to see that Eitrig was no savage, but a warrior of dignity, one who had chosen exile rather than submit to dishonor. It was a revelation, but revelations have consequences. One day, a patrol of Alliance soldiers spotted Tirion visiting the orc. They returned to report this treasonous fraternization, and within days, Tirion was accused of aiding the enemy. Now, Tirion could have denied it. He could have claimed it was all a misunderstanding, but that wasn't in his nature. When brought before the court, before his peers in the Silver Hand and the nobles of Lord Aeron, he told the truth. He spoke with that same calm conviction that had carried him through war. He said that Eitrig was an honorable being and that he had seen goodness in him. The crowd erupted in outrage. Orcs were beasts, murderers. The thought that one could possess honor was laughable, dangerous even. Tyrion's peers were shocked, his king was furious, and the whispers began. The paladin has lost his mind. He was stripped of his titles, his lands, his knighthood, his light itself dimmed. It was the end of everything he had built. Hearthglen was taken from him. His family turned away. Even his closest comrades in the Silver Hand looked at him as though he were a stranger. But Tirion did not waver. He left Hearthglen with little more than his horse, his sword, and his faith, not in the light, but in the simple belief that honor matters even when no one else believes in it. And thus began his exile. Imagine him now, riding away from his home, the setting sun painting the fields gold behind him, the tower bells tolling in the distance, the road ahead lonely, uncertain. Yet, for the first time, Tirion Fordring was truly free. He had chosen what was right over what was easy. And somewhere, far to the east, an orc named Eitrig probably smiled and nodded to himself, perhaps over a campfire of his own, muttering, "That humans got some spirit." That, dear listener, is how the great paladin of Hearthglen lost everything, and how in losing it, he began the slow, shining path toward redemption. The days following Tyrion's discovery of Eitrig were, at first, strangely peaceful. The valley around Hearthglen still sang with the music of life, bees humming over the clover fields, the soft ring of hammers in the blacksmith's forge, the smell of bread carried on the air. But in the corners of that peace, something was shifting, something inevitable. For you see, secrets have a way of being found, and goodness has a way of offending the small-minded. It began with Sir Bartholus, one of Tyrion's fellow knights. Bartholus had long envied Fordring's standing, his easy smile, his command of the light, the way the people adored him. If Tirion was a shining beacon, Bartholus fancied himself the candle beside it. Useful, yes, but always in shadow. And nothing stirs jealousy like righteousness that actually works. One morning, while Tirion was out riding, perhaps delivering food to Eitrig, perhaps merely walking beneath the quiet canopy where the ruin lay, Bartholus and his men followed. They watched from afar, armor glinting in the trees. They saw Tirion kneel before the orc, saw him speak, not as master to captive, but as friend to friend. Their jaws dropped so fast you could probably hear the collective clang of disbelief echo across Tirisfal. By the time Tirion returned to Hearthglen, the rumor had already outrun him. When Tirion entered his keep, he was met not by warm smiles or the scent of supper, but by cold eyes. His soldiers stood stiffly. His steward refused to meet his gaze. A herald, trembling with discomfort, informed him that he was summoned before Lord Commander Saidan Dathrohan, the leader of the Order of the Silver Hand in that region. Now, Dathrohan was a complicated man. In his youth, he had been noble and fierce, but by this time, his sense of justice had become as rigid as the steel he wore. Rules mattered more to him than mercy, and appearances more than truth. Tirion rode to the citadel, his mind calm. He had nothing to hide. His conscience, though heavy, was clean. When he arrived, the council chamber was already full. There stood Uther the Lightbringer himself, founder of the Silver Hand, mentor to princes and paladins alike. His beard shone like new snow under the torchlight, and his eyes were sorrowful, not angry. Beside him stood Saidan Dathrohan, stern and cold. Other knights murmured in the background, some curious, others already sharpening their judgments. And then there was Bartholus, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. You could tell he'd rehearsed his testimony in front of a mirror. Tirion knelt respectfully. "My lords," he said, "you have called me. I am here." Dathrohan's voice echoed like the toll of an iron bell. "Sir Tirion Fordring, you stand accused of consorting with the enemies of the Alliance. Do you deny that you aided an orc within your lands?" Tirion raised his head. His eyes were steady. "I do not." A ripple went through the chamber. Gasps, whispers, the shuffling of boots. "I aided him because he was wounded, and because he had shown me no malice. He was no enemy, not in heart, not in spirit. He was a being of honor." Now, to you or me, dear listener, that may sound noble, but to a room full of knights still haunted by the bloodshed of the Second War, it was like saying, "I've befriended a fellhound. He's quite misunderstood, really." Uther's brow furrowed. "Tirion," he said gently, "you know as well as any of us that the orcs are dangerous. Even those untainted by the Legion have brought ruin to our lands." Tirion nodded. "I do, my lord, but I have seen something different in this one. His name is Eitrig. He fights for nothing but the memory of what his people were, before the corruption, before the wars. Would the light have us condemn a soul for the sins of his kin?" Uther hesitated, because, of course, Tirion was quoting the very teachings of the Silver Hand itself. The light does not discriminate. It shines where it will. But Dathrohan was unmoved. "Your compassion blinds you, Fordring. You shame the Order and your king. I hereby suspend your titles and summon you to face judgment before the crown itself." Barthilus, naturally, smirked like a man who'd just stolen a horse and, gotten away with it. The trial was held in Stratholme, the shining jewel of northern Lordaeron, though shining now mostly with the polish of politics, not piety. The grand hall was packed to the rafters. Nobles, clergy, soldiers, and citizens came to witness the fall of a hero. And in the front row, Tirion's wife and son, Karandra and Talon, watched with wide, fearful eyes. The king presided, Tyrrhenus Menethil II, wise and weary. The same king who would, years later, weep over the ashes of his kingdom. But this was still a time of pomp and golden banners. Tirion stood tall in his armor, though he had been advised, begged even, to recant. Uther himself had visited him the night before. "Say that you were deceived, Tirion," Uther had urged. "Say that the orc bewitched you or misled you. They will spare you your lands, your family, your honor." But Tirion had shaken his head. "How can I ask forgiveness for telling the truth?" He really was the type to walk into a lion's den wearing a stake necklace and call it courage. When the trial began, witnesses came forth. Soldiers described seeing Tirion in the company of the orc. Barthilus painted vivid pictures of betrayal, the noble lord breaking bread with the beast. When it was Tyrion's turn, the room fell still. He did not defend himself with anger, nor beg for mercy. He simply spoke. "I am guilty," he said, "of showing kindness to one who did not deserve hatred. If that is treason, then I stand guilty. But I tell you this, honor is not the property of one race, nor faith the right of one people. I saw the light in him, as I have seen it in you." There was a silence so deep it might have cracked the air itself. For a brief, fragile moment, some felt shame. Others felt fury. And then, the sentence was given. Tirion Fordring was to be stripped of all titles, banished from Lordaeron, and excommunicated from the Order of the Silver Hand. As he knelt to receive the judgment, Uther himself, his old mentor, approached, carrying the hammer that had once anointed him. His eyes were wet. "Tirion," he whispered, "forgive us." "There is nothing to forgive," Tirion replied softly. "Do what must be done." And with a solemn blow, the seal of the Silver Hand was broken. He left Stratholme in silence. No fanfare, no procession. Only the sound of his own footsteps echoing in the marble hall as he removed his tabard and laid it across the floor. Outside, his horse, a white charger named Mirador, waited faithfully. Tirion stroked its mane, whispered a prayer to the light that had never truly left him, and rode toward the forest. Behind him, his wife wept quietly. His son, Talon, clutched her hand, too young to understand, too proud to cry. Ahead, the road to exile stretched long and lonely. They say that for a time, Tirion lived in a small hut at the edge of the Plague Lands, though they weren't called that yet. Back then, the trees were still green and the rivers clear. He built his home with his own hands, hunted, fished, spoke to no one but the wind and occasionally a stubborn goat who refused to move from his vegetable patch. The villagers nearby whispered of a fallen knight, a man who had lost his faith, or perhaps found a new one. But Tirion was at peace. He still prayed to the light each morning, not with words of grandeur, but with quiet gratitude for food, for air, for another dawn. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, he thought he could almost hear Eitrig's laughter echoing from the hills, deep, booming, and full of life. Thus ended the life of Tirion Fordring, Lord of Hearthglen. And thus began the legend of Tirion Fordring, Man of the Wilds, a paladin without a home, a knight without a kingdom, but a soul still steadfast in the light. His fall from grace was not his end. It was his beginning. And in time, as all things do, fate would come knocking again, in the form of a young adventurer, wide-eyed and weary, seeking a hermit in the woods to deliver a message from a dying orc. When a man loses everything that once defined him, the world does not end with thunder. It ends with chores. So it was for Tirion Fordring. He woke every morning with the sun sliding through the shutters of his rough little cottage. No servants, no banners, only the smell of damp earth and the creak of old wood. He chopped his own firewood, burned his fingers more often than he'd like to admit, and slowly learned that humility could, in fact, blister. His new neighbors were not noblemen, but squirrels, loud ones. There was one particularly rotund fellow who would perch on Tyrion's windowsill, judging him during breakfast as though conducting a divine audit. Yes, Tirion would mutter while chewing hard bread, I, too, miss bacon. He had built his home on the border of the forest near the Thondroril River. The air there was pure, and the nights dark enough that the stars looked like lanterns hung by the Titans themselves. In time, the villagers nearby came to know him only as the Old Knight by the River. They spoke of him with curiosity, but also with a certain reverence. For all his solitude, Tirion was never unkind. Children sometimes crept near his cottage, daring one another to knock. When they did, he'd answer, offer them honey cakes, and tell stories, softly, always softly, about griffins and courage, and how even kings must clean their armor sometimes. And then he'd send them home before dusk, for the forest could grow strange when the mists rolled in. People often imagine that losing favor with the silver hand meant losing the light itself, as though faith were something issued, like a permit. Tirion knew better. Each morning he knelt beside the river, the cold biting through his knees, and whispered the old prayers. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes warmth flickered through him like sunlight through leaves. The light, he learned, was not a reward, but a conversation. It listened when one spoke honestly, even if the words were weary. He found comfort in the rhythm of small things, planting turnips, mending fences, teaching himself to bake disastrous loaves of bread. There's humility in burning your breakfast. It's hard to feel too self-important when your kitchen smells like failure and smoke. And yet, he was happy, or perhaps content. He would sit on his porch at evening, a blanket around his shoulders, watching the river reflect the dying sun. The light glowed there too, he thought, not in cathedrals or shining armor, but in the slow patience of water finding its way. Now and then, the world tried to remember him. A wandering trader might stop by, recognize the jawline of a once famous paladin, and ask, "You're not Sir Fordring, are you?" Tirion would smile. "I was," he'd say. "Now I'm just Tirion." They would always nod, awkwardly, as if unsure whether to bow or apologize, and then hurry on. He had no quarrel with it. Titles were heavy. Anonymity was lighter than any shield. Still, the forest had ears, and even peace cannot hide forever. Rumors began to stir in the south, dark ones. Whispers of a plague, of strange necromancers in black robes gathering among the ruins, of beasts walking though they were long dead. At first, Tirion dismissed them as tavern tales, but birds fled earlier in the season, and one morning he found a doe lying cold near the riverbank, with no wound and no scent of predator. The light, he thought, was warning him. Something unnatural was waking. He prayed longer that day. The kettle went cold. Even the squirrel seemed subdued. Sometimes the past visited him in dreams. He would see Hearthglen as it had been, sunlit, full of laughter. His son, Talon, running down the courtyard with a wooden sword far too big for him, declaring he would be a paladin like his father. Karandra smiling, flower on her cheek from the kitchens. He'd wake with his hand outstretched, the dream dissolving into the smell of ashes and pine. There were letters he never sent, folded scraps of parchment tucked in a chest, notes to Talon, advice he would never deliver. Remember that courage is quiet. Remember that the light asks for honesty before heroics. Sometimes he wondered what had become of his boy, whether the order had raised him with pride or resentment, whether the name Fordring was spoken in anger or in wistful memory. But he never went back. Some roads, he knew, must wait for the light's timing. Years passed, seasons changed like pages turning. His beard turned silver, his armor, stored in a corner, gathered dust. In the spring, he mended roofs for nearby farmers. In the winter, he carved toys for children and told them stories by firelight, tales of Uther, of Anduin Lothar, of how the light can live even in the smallest candle. One girl once asked, "Mr. Tirion, is the light magic?" He smiled. "No, child. Magic answers to rules. The light answers to hope." And she, in the wisdom of 7 years, replied, "Then it must be stronger." He laughed until he cried, and the next morning carved her a wooden griffin. So went the exile of Tirion Fordring, a decade measured not in battles or triumphs, but in mornings survived, prayers whispered, and kindness quietly given. It was near the end of one long summer, when destiny decided his rest had gone on long enough. A knock came at his door, urgent, ragged. He opened it to find a young soldier, mud-streaked, carrying a satchel marked with the seal of the Argent Dawn. Inside the satchel lay a letter. It was from none other than Eitrig. The old orc's handwriting, rough but steady, spoke of honor and illness. He was dying. Before he passed, he wished to see once more the human who had shown him mercy. Tirion sat long after reading, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. The light within him stirred, not commanding, merely reminding. Some debts of friendship are not repaid in words, but in journeys. So he rose. He oiled his armor, though it creaked like old bones. He brushed the dust from his tabard, though the emblem had faded almost white. And he saddled Mirador, who whickered in greeting as if no years had passed at all. "Well, my friend," Tirion murmured, "it seems the road calls us again." Thus ended his quiet years. The hermit by the river became once more the knight upon the road, though older, wiser, and humbler than before. He did not know that this journey, ostensibly a simple farewell, would weave him back into the fate of kingdoms, would lead him to face the shadows of his past, and would kindle the redemption of both orc and man alike. But for now, there was only the road, the sound of hooves upon dirt, and the patient whisper of the light saying, "Go." The forests of the eastern plaguelands had changed since Tirion last rode through them. Once they had smelled of pine and rain. Now they reeked faintly of sickness and ash. Trees stood half withered, their branches reaching like hands that had forgotten how to pray. The light still touched the world, but it did so with caution, as though unwilling to wake the sleeping blight beneath the soil. Tirion rode quietly. His charger's hooves made almost no sound. Somewhere far away, a ghoul shrieked and was answered by the hollow call of a carrion bird. "A cheerful place for a reunion," Tirion murmured. Even exile could not rob him of his humor. He followed the old road until he came upon what had once been a border post, a crumbling archway half swallowed by weeds. Beyond it, the path curved down toward a lonely stretch of riverbank. There, hidden beneath the drooping canopy of ancient oaks, stood a figure waiting beside a small campfire. The figure was an adventurer, though at this distance Tirion could not tell if man or woman, human or elf. They were travel-worn, armor scuffed, cloak torn. The kind of person who had been everywhere and seen everything, including perhaps one too many murlocs. When they turned, Tirion saw the letter in their hand, the same letter that had carried Eitrig's plea. The adventurer bowed slightly, as one might to a story rather than a person. "Are you Tirion Fordring?" "I was," Tirion answered, smiling. "But the name seems to find me even when I try to lose it. You have something for me?" They handed him the letter. He broke the seal with careful fingers, as though afraid the wax might remember pain. The handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, uneven, but proud. "Brother of the light," it read, "age has found me. The years of exile weigh heavy. Yet I die with honor, for I have seen that there are men who know truth when it stands before them. If the spirits allow, I would see you once more before the end. The argent dawn will guide you to me." At the bottom, in smaller script, "Do not bring bread. The healers insist on porridge." Tirion smiled sadly. He never did trust soft food. He looked up at the adventurer. "And how did you come by this?" "From Light's Hope Chapel," they said. "They found me on the road. They said the old orc was fading and asked me to deliver it to you. They didn't say you'd be quite so legendary." Tirion's laugh was quiet, almost embarrassed. Legends have the advantage of being less grumpy before breakfast. Still, you have my thanks. The adventurer hesitated. He's in the western Plaguelands now, kept by the Dawn, recovering from a fight near Andorhal. But the undead gather thick there. I can't go alone. Then neither of us shall go alone, Tirion replied, standing. The Light's road is safer with company, and besides, I could use a guide who remembers which bridge hasn't collapsed. And so the pair set off together, one aged paladin, one restless wanderer, and a horse with opinions about muddy roads. The landscape unfurled before them like a wounded map. They passed shattered farms where scarecrows hung from their posts, not to frighten birds, but to warn travelers. Do not linger. They crossed fields silvered by blight, where even the wind moved carefully, unwilling to stir the dust. Tirion spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of both humor and heartbreak. Once I blessed this land, he said, gesturing toward a ruined chapel. Now the Light here whispers instead of sings, yet even whispers matter. The adventurer nodded. They had seen much of Azeroth, but something about this old knight's calm steadiness made the desolation feel almost bearable. At dusk, they made camp beneath the crooked boughs of a dead oak. Tirion cooked, badly. His stew had the texture of penance and the flavor of regret. It's edible, he insisted, ladling it into a wooden bowl. For whom? The adventurer asked, staring into the bubbling gray mixture. For the righteous, Tirion said with mock gravity. The unrighteous may have seconds. They both laughed, and for a moment the forest seemed to breathe again. The next morning the fog lay thick as wool. They rode single file along the road toward Andorhal, where Eitrig had last been seen. But halfway there, the world erupted in motion. Shapes lunged from the mist, undead farmers still clutching rusted scythes. Tirion reacted before thought. The old instincts surged up like the light itself. He dismounted, hammer in hand, and the radiance that flared from him cut through the fog like dawn through night. Back, foul things! You walk without purpose. Find it no longer here. The hammer struck. The air rang. Undead scattered like leaves in a storm. The adventurer fought beside him, blades flashing. When silence returned, the ground steamed faintly, the mist burning away under residual holiness. Tirion leaned on his weapon, breathing hard but smiling. Still works, he said. You make it look easy. It isn't, he admitted, but the Light has a way of forgiving rust. By evening, they reached Light's Hope Chapel, that small bastion of warmth amid the cold. Lanterns glowed softly under its eaves, and the air smelled of oil and incense. Paladins in silver armor moved about quietly, tending to the wounded. When Tirion entered, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the hall. Few among the younger knights had ever seen him, but the name Fordring was carved into their prayers. A high elf healer approached. We didn't know if you'd come. Neither did I, Tirion said. Where is he? She led him to a side room. There, upon a cot woven from reeds and linen, lay Eitrig. Time had bent him, but not broken him. His tusks were duller now, his skin ashen, but his eyes, those fierce, bright eyes, lit up when he saw the human enter. So, Eitrig rasped. The hermit remembers old debts. Tirion knelt beside him. You still owe me that sparring match, old friend. Ha! You'd lose. You've gone soft. Look at you. You've grown moss. The adventurer stood discreetly aside, smiling. They spoke for hours. About the years, the wars, the foolishness of youth, about Talon, about the Horde's redemption, about the price of peace. But the orcs' breaths grew shallow. The healers could do little more than ease the pain. Eitrig turned to Tirion. "Do not mourn me. I walk to the ancestors proud. You taught me that even enemies can share honor. Keep that lesson. The world forgets too quickly." And with that, he drifted into sleep, peaceful at last. Tirion sat long into the night, hand resting on his friend's arm. When dawn touched the chapel windows, he whispered a prayer that was half light, half orcish chant, and holy love. After the burial, a simple cairn beneath a hill, Tirion stood overlooking the plains. The adventurer joined him. "He died well," they said. "He lived better," Tirion replied. "The world will not remember that. Part, so we must." He turned to the adventurer. "I cannot go back to hiding. The light did not spare me for silence. Hearthglen still stands, but darkness coils around it. My son serves the Scarlet Crusade now. Men who claim to fight for purity, but have forgotten compassion. Perhaps it is time I see what became of the boy." The adventurer raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous." "All worthy things are," Tirion said. "Will you help me?" And thus the quest continued. Because in World of Warcraft, a conversation never ends without at least one more errand. The road north wound through fields of gray ash where once golden wheat had grown. The towers of Hearthglen rose on the horizon, their banners crimson with the sigil of the Scarlet Crusade. The Crusade, fervent, fanatical, convinced that the only cure for corruption was fire. Tirion had heard of them, but seeing their zeal firsthand was something else. At the gates, guards in spotless red armor halted him. "State your purpose." "I seek Tirion Fordring." The guard's eyes narrowed. "Lord Talon serves the crusade. Outsiders are not permitted." Tirion bowed slightly. "Tell him his father calls." That caused murmurs, though most assumed it a jest. Still, the words carried weight, as old names sometimes do. The adventurer and Tirion were eventually granted entrance, escorted, of course, by a squad of suspicious zealots. Inside, the town felt strangely sterile. Streets swept clean, windows shuttered, prayers muttered too loudly. When at last they reached the inner keep, Talon stood waiting. Tirion Fordring was every inch his father's image, broad-shouldered, proud, but his eyes were weary, dulled by years of duty, twisted into fanaticism. "Father," he said, disbelief and longing tangled in his voice. "I thought you dead." "Not yet," Tirion smiled, "though I've had mornings that argued otherwise." The reunion was awkward at first, full of half-finished sentences and too long silences. The adventurer wisely busied themselves with pretending to examine the tapestries. Tirion spoke gently. "You wear the colors of the crusade." "They fight the scourge," Talon said defensively. "They protect what's left." "They destroy what they do not understand," Tirion countered softly. "Do they protect mercy? Do they protect truth?" The younger paladin looked away. "You were cast out for weakness." "No, my son," Tirion said, voice barely above a whisper. "I was cast out for kindness." Something flickered in Talon's eyes then. A child remembering stories by firelight. A boy once taught that the light forgives. "If what you say is true," he said at last, "then help me see it. Help me remember what the light truly means." And thus another quest began, to free Talon from the grip of the Crusade zealotry. The journey that followed, the escape from Hearthglen, the pursuit by the Scarlet Crusade, the tragedy that awaited beyond those gates, deserves its own long telling, and we will wander there soon. But for tonight, hold this image in your mind. An old paladin standing beside his son beneath a blood-red banner, the light between them not as weapon, but as bridge. That bridge, fragile as it was, would soon cost them everything. And in losing it, Tirion Fordring would at last find his full redemption. When dawn broke over Hearthglen, its light was the wrong color. It should have been warm and golden, like wheat ripening. Instead, it was pale, strained through a sky the shade of steel. The bells in the chapel rang not to greet the day, but to summon the faithful and the fearful to prayer. Tirion and the adventurer had spent the night hidden in a storage loft above the stables. Below, Scarlet Crusaders went about their routines with a precision that made the heart ache. Faith without laughter is a kind of frost, and Hearthglen had long since frozen. Talon arrived quietly at sunrise. He wore no helmet, and without the weight of ceremony, his face looked younger, uncertain. "I have read the old codes," he said. "What the Silver Hand once swore. They speak of compassion, not cleansing flame." "Then you already remember," Tirion replied. "But memory and courage are two different lights. Talon still served a master who would not forgive such remembering. Grand Crusader Dathrohan himself ruled here, the same man who years ago had pronounced Tyrion's exile. Time had turned him harder, his voice louder, his mercy thinner than paper. They could not simply walk out. Every gate was guarded, every watchtower manned. The adventurer, practical as always, suggested stealth. "There's a postern gate near the river. 2 guards. I can handle one, you the other." "And my son?" Tirion asked. "We trust him to walk beside us instead of before them." Talon smiled faintly. "After years of giving orders, it will be good to follow one." That night they moved. Cloaks drawn, armor muffled beneath rough canvas, they crept through the narrow lanes. A hound barked once. The adventurer tossed it a scrap of dried meat, whispered a prayer of their own, and it lay back down with a sigh. The light works in mysterious ways, occasionally involving snacks. At the gate, 2 crusaders leaned against their spears, discussing the relative holiness of tea versus coffee. The debate ended abruptly when Tyrion's hand settled on one shoulder. "Peace," he murmured. There was no killing, only the brief, bright flare of the light's sleep charm, a mercy learned in gentler years. The men slumped, unharmed, dreaming of whatever zealots dream of. They slipped through the gate into the open fields beyond. Freedom lasted approximately the length of one triumphant sigh. Behind them, the alarm bells began to ring. From the watchtower, torches flared. "Traitors!" voices cried. "The Grand Crusader's prisoner escapes!" Arrows hissed through the night. One caught Talon's pauldron, spinning him half around, but he stayed upright. The adventurer drew steel. Tirion raised his hammer, and for the first time, father and son fought side by side. The light in Tyrion's hands burned gold. In Talon's, it shimmered pale, newer, less sure, but still beautiful. The undead of the Plague Lands had taught them both that courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to stop walking when fear arrives. They broke through the last ring of guards and ran. Behind them, Hearthglen's bells clanged like a sentence trying to catch its subject. They reached the river at dawn. Mist rolled across it, thick and white. On the far bank lay the road to Light's hope, safety, if such a word still had meaning. But the bridge was gone, half collapsed into the water. The adventurer pointed downstream. "There's an old ford, shallow, maybe crossable." They led the horses carefully into the current. Cold bit through boots and greaves. The water tugged at them like desperate hands. Halfway across, the cry went up again. Crusaders on the ridge, red armor blazing. Talon turned back toward the shore they'd left. "I'll hold them. Go." "No!" Tirion shouted. "We stand together." "Father, you taught me honor is choosing right when wrong is easier. Let me choose." The adventurer tried to grab his arm, but Talon smiled, the kind of smile that already belongs to memory, and strode back up the bank. Light blossomed around him, fierce, defiant. He was beautiful in that moment, a flame refusing to yield to wind. From across the river, Tirion saw it happen. The melee, the shouts, the final blinding surge as Talon invoked the light one last time, and then the sudden stillness after. No scream, only silence, and the slow collapse of brightness into dawn. When Tirion reached the bank, the Crusaders were gone. Only Talon remained, fallen amid broken reeds. The adventurer knelt, bowed their head. Tirion dropped beside his son, cradled him as he had when the boy first learned to walk. "You did not fail me," he whispered. "You found the light yourself." Talon's lips moved once, perhaps forming the word father, and then he was still. The light did not strike, nor thunder roll. Instead, it rained, soft, cleansing rain that smelled faintly of spring. Even the plague lands seemed to pause, listening. Tirion laid his son's body gently upon the earth and knelt. He wept, not loudly, but with the deep, silent ache of a man who has carried too much grace and too much grief. Then he lifted his hammer, held it skyward. "Light, hear me. My oath was broken long ago by pride and politics. I swore to serve only truth. Let my son's sacrifice be the seal of that vow renewed." The clouds above him parted. A shaft of sunlight, pure and gold, fell upon him. The hammer blazed, runes reigniting. His tabard, once faded, glowed white as morning. The light had never left him. It had Artines, only waited for him to lift his eyes. The adventurer watched as the air itself seemed to breathe. The sorrow on Tyrion's face did not vanish, but it softened, turning into something serene. "He is gone," they said quietly. "No," Tirion answered. "He is with the light, and the light is with us." Together they built a cairn of stone beside the river. Tirion placed Talon's sword atop it, point upward, a beacon for any lost soul wandering the gray lands. Then he turned to the adventurer. "You have done more than carry a letter. You carried faith to one who had forgotten how to hold it. Thank you." He reached into his pouch, withdrew a small token, the seal of the dawn, gleaming softly. "Take this. Let it remind you that redemption is not an end, but a path. Walk it well." The adventurer bowed, and somewhere in the unseen distance, the music of the world shifted, as though one quest had closed and another quietly opened. Thus ended the quest of redemption. It began with a letter, crossed forests of sorrow, and finished at the river's edge where father found son, and both found peace. The bards in taverns would later shorten it, of course. They would speak of battles and holy fire and forget the quiet parts, the smell of wet earth, the warmth of porridge shared, the small, ridiculous squirrel on a hermit's windowsill. But the light remembers the small things most of all. Tirion Fordring rode from that place not as exile, not as fallen knight, but as the first light of a new dawn. In time, he would raise the banner of the Argent Crusade, forge the Ashbringer, and stand upon the ice-crowned citadel against the very Lich King himself. Yet those are other nights, other fires. For this one, let the image linger. An old paladin on a rain-washed hill, a hammer in his hand, the light resting gently on his shoulders like forgiveness finally spoken aloud. When grief has burned itself down to its smallest ember, what remains is duty. So it was with Tirion Fordring. He left the cairn by the river and rode east, the light still warm on his shoulders. The world did not seem lighter. Nothing could fill the space a sun leaves, but it seemed possible again, as though mercy had drawn a small curtain of gold across the ruined sky. The plague lands, however, did not rest. The scourge multiplied, the Scarlet Crusade hardened into paranoia, and men who had once been healers now swung torches at shadows. Between the crimson zealots and the pale dead, hope itself seemed an endangered species. Tirion could not unsee it, and the light does not give visions only for comfort. It gives them for work. He returned to Light's Hope Chapel, that small island of sanity in a sea of decay. The paladins and priests who served there were not the silver hand of old, nor the Crusade's purists. They were something humbler, stitched together from whatever faith the world still had left. They called themselves the Argent Dawn. When Tirion arrived, there was a moment of silence, the kind reserved for ghosts and legends. Then the oldest among them, a woman with hair the color of frost and eyes that still burned with discipline, stepped forward. "We heard of what happened at Hearthglen," she said. "We thought you'd gone to the light." "I tried," Tirion answered. "It sent me back." The dawn gave him no title, no throne, only a simple place among their ranks. He accepted gladly. The humility of shared labor, sharpening blades, teaching prayers, patching walls, was exactly the penance he needed. In time, though, his voice carried again. People listened. They remembered that he had lived through the darkness and had not become it. And so, quietly at first, then with growing conviction, the Argent Crusade began to form. Paladins and priests, dwarves, elves, even repentant orcs, united not by politics, but by purpose, to heal the world, not to own it. Among the dawn, there were whispers of a weapon, a holy blade that had once burned brighter than any forge, the Ashbringer. It had been wielded by Alexandros Mograine, who in his lifetime had been both saint and tragedy. The sword, tainted by betrayal, lay lost. Some said shattered, some said cursed. Tirion listened to these rumors not with greed, but with grief. He understood relics. He knew they carried more sorrow than glory. Yet he also knew that symbols matter. He sought out the tale, traveled to the ruins of Strathome, where the air itself seemed to remember fire. There, amid the ghosts of 1,000 unburied souls, he found what was left of the blade, its hilt blackened, its edge dull, yet still humming faintly with light restrained. He knelt beside it, brushed away the ash. "You are not finished," he said. "Neither am I." When he lifted it, the light flared, not blinding, but gentle, like the smile of a patient friend. The weapon did not need perfection. It needed purpose. From that day forward, Tirion worked as a man possessed, not by vengeance, but by hope. He rebuilt the old order with new vows: compassion first, courage second, purity only where it served mercy. The Argent Crusade rose from the mingling of the dawn's humility and the silver hand's discipline. They built chapels where others built walls, healed enemies as often as allies. To follow Tirion was not to be unafraid, but to believe that fear could be redeemed. He trained new generations, men and women who had grown up knowing only plague and despair. He told them stories, softly, of a hermit who fed squirrels and of a son who died brave. "The light is not a weapon," he told them. "It is a promise. Keep it, and it will keep you." Some nights, around their own campfires, the younger paladins would whisper that the old man must surely have wings hidden beneath his cloak. He would laugh and reply, "If I did, I'd trip over them." Years passed. The plague worsened. The undead's master revealed himself at last, the Lich King, once Prince Kaiha, Arthas Menethil, the same royal line that had judged Tirion long ago. The world's heroes marched north toward Ice-Crown Citadel, and Tirion, by now gray-bearded but unbowed, led the Argent Crusade at their head. The Ashbringer shone new again, the light within it pure and clear. At Light's Hope Chapel, the forces of darkness tested them. Undead poured from the hills, and Tirion met them not with hatred, but with fierce pity. When he raised the Ashbringer, it blazed so bright that even the Scourge paused, remembering for one heartbeat what warmth felt like. He spoke then, his voice carrying through the din. "You cannot kill what the light has already forgiven." And the tide turned. From that day on, the Argent Crusade became a legend not of conquest, but of cleansing, the only army that marched with hymns instead of drums. At last came the siege of Icecrown. You may know the broad strokes, the alliance of horde and alliance, the climb through frozen spires, the endless legions of the dead. But within that storm of heroism, there was a single stillness. Tirion, alone before the Lich King. Arthas, the fallen prince, sneered. "You would challenge me, old man. I have slain better than you." "No," Tirion said quietly. "You have slain emptier than me." He struck once, and the light answered. The Ashbringer shattered the frozen throne's bindings. The world shook, the helm of domination fell. When the silence that followed finally settled, Tirion lifted the crown and whispered a prayer for every soul that had ever been trapped beneath its weight. He did not keep it. He knew too well that no mortal should. He placed it instead upon another's brow, sealing both curse and mercy in one act of impossible restraint. For a time afterward, there was peace. Tirion returned to Hearthglen, not as lord, but as caretaker. The fields grew again. Children played among the old stones. He was seen walking the streets at dawn, greeting farmers, blessing wells. When people called him High Lord, he'd shake his head. "Just Tirion," he'd say. "Titles get in the way of work." He taught that the light could live in a baker's kindness, in a mason's patience, in a child's laughter. And though he had faced kings and monsters, He seemed happiest mending fences and tasting terrible soup cooked by young recruits. No peace lasts forever. When the Legion returned from the stars, even Hearthglen felt its tremor. Tirion, old but unyielding, led his knights once more into the broken shore, into fire and chaos. The stories say he fell there, captured, tortured, nearly broken. The light itself bent low in sorrow. Yet even then, his faith did not dim. When at last he perished, freed at last from the body's burden, the sky above the battlefield flared brilliant gold. Those who saw it swore they heard a calm voice, distant and warm. Hold to hope. They built him a monument near Light's Hope Chapel. Pilgrims still come, leaving small offerings, hammers carved from wood, letters never sent to fathers, bits of bread for unseen squirrels. And that, dear listener, is the life of Tirion Fordring, the man who fell from grace only to discover that grace does not break when it falls. It bends, it teaches, it shines again. He was never the loudest of heroes, never the most decorated. But when the world forgot how to forgive, he remembered. And that is why his name endures not just in chronicles, but in the quiet corners of hearts that still believe in decency. In the end, every hero becomes a story told by firelight. The armor rusts, the banners fade, but the warmth remains, traveling from mouth to mouth, hearth to hearth, until even the stars hum it back to us. Tirion Fordring's name is one of those. When the plague lands finally began to heal, pilgrims said they could see faint trails of light where his feet had once walked. Not miracles, perhaps, just places where the grass grew a little greener, the air smelled a little less of sorrow. Children born in Hearthglen after the wars were told that if you speak kindly, even to strangers, an old knight smiles somewhere beyond the veil. They left small offerings on window ledges, a coin, a crust of bread, a tiny hammer carved from driftwood. The squirrels, of course, approved. Light's Hope Chapel became more than a fortress. It became a place where people came to breathe. Priests there tell travelers to sit quietly in the early morning when the mist still clings to the grass, and listen. If the world is very still, you can almost hear a man's voice humming an old hymn, off-key, patient, happy. They say it's Tirion keeping the rhythm for the light itself. In dreams, the good kind, the ones that visit between waking and sleep, you might find yourself on a path of golden wheat. A cottage waits at the end, smoke curling from its chimney. An old paladin opens the door, flower on his gauntlets. "Ah," he says, smiling, "you've come a long way. Sit. There's stew, terrible but honest." The kettle hums. The chairs creak. Outside, a river murmurs its endless, forgiving song. He listens as you speak of your own battles, your own doubts, and when you finish, he nods. "Then you've already found the light," he says. "You just needed to remember its name. You wake with the taste of bread and laughter and something like peace. Every story ends, but the light, if it is to be believed, never does. Some say Tirion watches still, not from thrones or heavens, but from the edges of every good deed. When a soldier spares an enemy, when a child shares half a meal, when someone forgives themselves after a long night of mistakes, a warmth flickers there, small, golden, familiar. That is him. That is the light, that is the same thing. And so the tale rests. The night sleeps, the hammer cools, the world keeps turning, slower, softer, kinder because he walked upon it once. If ever the dark feels too heavy, remember this story. That honor can survive exile, that faith can survive doubt, and that even in the coldest plague lands, one candle is enough to begin the morning. Good night, traveler. May the light watch your dreams, and may your path tomorrow be bright and brave, and just a little bit funny.